Hey, AP Environmental, it is me, Miss Willis, and I am going to teach you how to monitor our fresh water. So we're going to go through some of the tests that are usually performed on our fresh water and also ocean sources, and then teach you a little bit about why that is so important. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the things that water testers look for is turbidity. And turbidity is a measure of how many suspended particles are in the water. So the more turbid the water is, the more cloudy or maybe possibly darker that it looks. And the reason why this is an issue is because if the water is cloudy, sunlight cannot penetrate that water source. And so that means there's less photosynthesis in the water and of course less oxygen in the water. So taking a look at these images, you can see the beaker on the far right has very high turbidity. And then comparing just two water sources here, you can see the image on the left has very low turbidity. You can see through the water and there's not a lot of suspended particles in that water. But then take a look at this image to the right, right? Very high turbidity, lots of suspended particles in that waterway. Something else that water scientists measure is salinity. And salinity is the concentration of salt in the waterway. So the ocean we would consider to have high salinity where freshwater systems would be low salinity. And changing those salt levels in the waterways could lead to some drastic kill-offs of organisms in the water because they can only tolerate certain salt levels. Many times, scientists will also look for E. coli bacteria in the waterway. If scientists do find E. coli in the specimen that they are sampling, this will usually indicate that the water has been polluted with either human or animal fecal material. Instead of testing just specifically for E. coli, sometimes water scientists will look for something called total coliform. And total coliform is a measure of a lot of the bacteria that comes from fecal material put together into one measurement. And just keep in mind that really bacteria should not be in drinking water. So any level of bacteria that's found in your drinking water is deemed to be unsafe. Oxygen is a very important component of water. When it is in water, we call it dissolved oxygen, and usually healthy waterways will have a dissolved oxygen level greater than 8 parts per million. If there's anything less, that waterway really cannot hold very many aerobic organisms. And so sometimes when the oxygen gets so low, it can only support detritivores, those things that feed off algae in eutrophication. Keep in mind also that oxygen is often removed by cellular respiration. So any organism that's using oxygen in the water will decrease those levels. And it's added into the water through photosynthetic organisms that are living in the waterways. As a review, detritivores are organisms that tend to eat dead organic material. So some of the things that could be dead or organic in a waterway would be maybe decomposing algae or leaves or things that enter the water that need to be broken down. So on land, some common detritivores are things like termites and fungus, and of course bacteria. But in the water, we have shrimps and worms and snails, and they just feed off of this dead material. But in doing so, they use oxygen in order to break down their food. In order to figure out how much oxygen these detritivores or other organisms place on their waterway, you can do a measurement called BOD, or biological oxygen demand. And so this number tells you that it tells you how much oxygen is actually being used by organisms in a waterway over a 5-day period. So you can really get a sense for how much respiration is taking place in the area. You may have also heard of water hardness, and water hardness, or if your water is hard, it means that there is dissolved calcium or magnesium in your water. So when you pour water out of a tap faucet and it tends to be a little cloudy, like white and cloudy, but then all that stuff settles, you probably most likely have hard water. Why is this a problem? Well, that calcium and magnesium can build up on your faucets. It can build up in your pipes and cause them to look not so shiny and nice anymore. Really, there is nothing wrong with the water. It just means that there's calcium and magnesium in that water. And lastly, if you ever see this in a waterway, it's most likely polluted and it should be monitored. And so keep in mind when you have massive fish kills like this, number one, it could be because sewage or waste was being added to that waterway that stimulated oxygen consumption by the detritivores and pretty much robbed the waterway of oxygen. Or nitrates and phosphates and different types of detergents and fertilizers could be added to that water, and it could cause a process called eutrophication, where the algae grows because they're getting all these limiting nutrients, and then the algae dies because it runs out of resources. And that stimulates the detritivore population because now they have all this dead algae and organic material to eat. And then again, they rob the waterway of oxygen. So if that does occur, scientists again will usually monitor their water and they'll do those various tests that we just talked about to see how healthy the waterway is. All right, everyone, that completes water monitoring, and I hope that was helpful.